to learn more about the scope of the problem of human trafficking here in Delaware. We're honored tonight to be joined by 3 guests who will discuss the scope of human trafficking, what's being done to fight and prosecute this scourge on society, and the services available for those who are survivors of human trafficking. I want to thank all that helped coordinate and arrange this informational session. First of all, my legislative aide, Amy Willey, back there. Thank you, Amy, so much. Matt Rebel, who's managing the recording of tonight so that we can share it online for those who weren't able to be here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the concerned citizens that helped put this together. And in no particular order, Hope Whaley, Sherry Long, who were both at the check-in desk, Lewis Briggs, Marilyn Booker, Hilton Phillips Page, and you, especially you, for coming out here tonight to educate yourselves on this issue. I hope that the takeaways tonight will be knowledge so that you can exercise to be aware of human trafficking, and the knowledge that you could take and share with others in the community. I'd also like to recognize a couple other people that we have here. Gerald Hawker is here, Senator Gerald Hawker, and Representative Jeff Pulaski. They're both here, so thank you both for coming. Tonight's format's going to be simple. We have 3 guests who will present to us, and we'll follow by a Q&A session with you, the members of the audience. First up tonight will be Caroline Brittingham with the Human Trafficking Unit at the Delaware Attorney General's Office. She'll be presenting with Corporal Dustin Yenser, a detective with the Delaware State Police who investigates these crimes. After their presentation, we'll have Yolanda Montgomery with Zoe Ministries to explain the wraparound services available for the survivors of human trafficking. So you've heard enough from me. I'll turn it over to these 2.
Caroline Brittingham. I'm a prosecutor at the Attorney General's office here in Georgetown. Our unit created a human trafficking unit in January of last year. I've been at the Department of Justice for 10 years, but I moved to the human trafficking unit when it was created. So that's a little bit about me. I grew up in Milton. I went to Caucus in high school. This was a really far way for me to get here tonight. I had to put in my MapQuest to figure out where this high school was. But that's just a little bit about me. Just a little icebreaker. I'll let Detective Yenser introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. You hear me?
We'll share.
There we go. All right, so I'm Detective Yenser. I work out of Troop 4 here in Georgetown. I got into the criminal investigations unit in 2019. Then, shortly after getting into criminal investigations, I was assigned to be a human trafficking detective. I've been in the major crimes unit now for 3 years, and recently, in the past couple of weeks, I've been assigned to the human trafficking coordinator for the state of Delaware. So I do have some experience now with investigating human trafficking cases. So today I'd like to be able to share some of those with you, and hopefully give you guys a better understanding of what we're looking for.
So I'm going to wait for my slides to be up on the screen first. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. So I do not have a fancy clicker, so I'm going to have to say next slide. Okay, so next slide, please. So what is human trafficking? I wanted to start with a poll. How many people in the audience have seen the movie Taken? Quite a lot. How many people have seen the movie The Sound of Freedom? So about equal to Taken. That's interesting. So the issue of human trafficking has been featured in countless movies and shows over the years. And that's kind of the main source of information for a lot of the general public about what human trafficking is. One of the most well-known movies, I think, is Taken. So it's a 2008 movie. It features Liam Neeson. He's a retired CIA agent, and he's rescuing his daughter from a group of Albanian traffickers. So this is a great movie if you haven't seen it, but the movie also promotes a lot of misconceptions about the idea of human trafficking. in that it involves women being kidnapped by strangers and sold overseas to overseas buyers. Most often, individuals are not abducted by strangers, but instead they're recruited through manipulation by people that they know, loved ones or family members, trusted friends. The movie also implies that all victims are women, when in fact, obviously, men and boys are trapped in the sex industry as well. So even though the movie tells a story of how traffickers obtain their victims, it's important to keep in mind that's not always an accurate depiction of what we see. We'll go over some case studies of cases that we see here in Delaware, and none of them are going to be like the movie Taken, although it's a great movie. I always want to start off with, it's not exactly what we see in the movies. Next slide. So what is human trafficking? So human trafficking first became a crime in the U.S. in the year 2000 under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. That was the first federal comprehensive law to address trafficking in persons. In 2003, Washington became the first state to criminalize human trafficking, and since then, every state has enacted laws to criminalize human trafficking. Delaware legislation is fairly new compared to some of the other states. It first became a crime under the Delaware Code in the year 2014, so less than 10 years. So human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of placing men, women, or children in slavery or slavery-like conditions. It usually involves the exploitation of some known vulnerability and the inability to extricate oneself from that situation.
I'd like to add something to that. Majority of the cases, actually all the cases I've handled here in the state of Delaware, I want to go back to the movie Taken. Most likely in Delaware, I'm not saying it will never happen, but most likely that scenario won't happen here in Delaware. The cases that I've handled have been actually, believe it or not, domestic related, where parents have sold their children to domestic partners. And later on in this presentation, I want to talk to you about, it's not in the slides, but I have worked with the FBI and Homeland Security on numerous investigations. I'll explain to you a little more, but I just wanted to give you that little tidbit.
So next slide. On the screen are some common myths and misconceptions about human trafficking before we get into exactly what trafficking is. So the first one, human trafficking is always or usually a violent crime. By far, that is the most pervasive myth about human trafficking, that it involves some type of kidnapping or abduction. But as we will talk about more, in reality, most people use psychological means like tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening their victims into providing commercial sex or labor. The second myth, all human trafficking involves commercial sex. That is definitely a myth because there's obviously labor trafficking as well. It may be less out there in the media, it may be more underreported, but there are definitely instances of labor trafficking. Worldwide, experts believe that there are more situations of labor trafficking than sex trafficking, but it's just underreported. The third myth, traffickers target victims that they don't know. So what we see is that many survivors have been trafficked by their romantic partners, including their spouses, their boyfriends, or by other family members, including their parents. Only undocumented individuals get trafficked in the United States. That is a myth. Polaris, which is a great source on human trafficking material, they've worked on thousands of cases of trafficking involving foreign national survivors who are legally living and are working in the United States. And those include survivors of both sex and labor trafficking. Another myth is that people being trafficked are physically unable to leave and are physically held against their will. So that is sometimes the case, but more often people are being trafficked in situations that they just can't get out of because it's more complicated than that. A lot of times we hear that human trafficking involves invisible chains or invisible handcuffs. They're not actually being chained in their home. They may be people that you see out and about in the community. You may see them at the gas station. You may see them at a convenience store or at a shopping store. They are not chains. They are not shackled physically, but they are attached to that person in other ways. Another myth, only women and girls can be victims and survivors of sex trafficking. There's actually one study out there that estimates that as many as half of sex trafficking victims, survivors are males. Advocates believe that the percentage may be even higher, but that male victims are far less likely to be identified. Human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. That is a myth. It does happen in legal industries, including restaurants, cleaning services, construction, factories, and more. All commercial sex is human trafficking. That is a myth. All commercial sex is not human trafficking. Commercial sex involving an adult is human trafficking if the person providing the commercial sex is doing so against her will as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. That force, fraud, or coercion aspect is not necessary if the individual is a minor, but we'll get into that a little bit more. The last myth on the screen is that people in active trafficking situations always want help to get out. That is a myth because a lot of the people are not ready to get out. They're connected to their trafficker. They're their friends. They're their family member. Just like the cycle of domestic violence, they're not always going to get out that first time that they contact the police. So that's obviously a more complicated situation. Next slide. So another thing to point out is that smuggling and trafficking are obviously different. I worked at an awareness event at NASCAR last year, and somebody came up to our tent. It was put on by the Delaware Anti-Trafficking Action Council. Somebody came up to our tent and said, well, if the president would close the borders, trafficking would go away. And that is not an accurate depiction of what trafficking is. There's differences between smuggling and trafficking, and the important thing to keep in mind is that smuggling is voluntary, trafficking is not voluntary. Smuggling is transportation-based and involves a movement, but trafficking does not involve movement, or doesn't have to involve movement. Somebody could be trafficked in their own home. Next slide. So now that we went over the myths and misconceptions and what trafficking isn't, on the screen is what trafficking is under the Delaware Code. So under Title 11, Section 787 of the Delaware Code, a person is guilty of trafficking an individual if the person knowingly recruits, transports, harbors, receives, provides, obtains, isolates, maintains, or entices an individual in furtherance of forced labor or sexual servitude. So the federal definition of human trafficking talks about force, fraud, or coercion, and this is the Delaware definition of human trafficking. Human trafficking under the Delaware Code is a Class C felony. So if somebody is convicted of this, they are facing 0 to 15 years in jail. If the victim is a minor, human trafficking of a minor is a Class B felony. They're facing 2 to 25 years in jail.
So I just want everybody to pay attention to the specific wording of their of the human trafficking charge in Delaware for later when we have some case study, because it definitely helped us with charging a handful of cases.
So next slide, please. So the definition of forced labor is also in the Delaware Code. So first it gives the definition of human trafficking, and then it breaks down forced labor and sexual servitude. So forced labor, a person is guilty if they use coercion to compel an individual to provide labor or services. So coercion, there's multiple ways for somebody to be coerced into forced labor. So coercion can involve threats of serious harm. It can involve physical restraint, psychological manipulation, document confiscation, and shame or fear-inducing threats. Next slide, please. On the screen is the Delaware Code definition of sexual servitude. So a person is guilty of this offense if they knowingly maintain or make available a minor for the purpose of engaging the minor in commercial sexual activity, or if they use coercion or deception to compel an adult to engage in commercial sexual activity. So you'll see here there's a distinction. If they are a minor, that element of coercion is not necessary. They just need to maintain or make available the minor. They don't need to force them or induce some fraud or coercion to make them engage in the commercial sexual activity. Commercial sexual activity is defined by any sexual activity for which anything of value is given, promised, or received by another person. It is not a defense in a prosecution that the minor consented to engage in commercial sexual activity, or that the defendant believed the minor was an adult. So those are two really important things to keep in mind for Detective Yenser and I in prosecution and charging. Even if the minor consented in that activity, they can't consent in that activity. And if the defendant believed that they were over the age of 18, that does not matter for charging them with that crime. Next slide. On the screen are some human trafficking trends. I apologize, they're from 2020. I know that they're from Polaris, and Polaris just came out with their 2022 statistics. They were a little bit delayed with COVID. So Detective Yenser and I were talking about this before. We definitely think the numbers have gone up, but there's still some good numbers to provide to you here today. So in 2020, 10,583 cases of human trafficking were reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That's the main source of reporting throughout the United States, is this National Human Trafficking Hotline. Of those 10,583 cases, 16,658 victims were identified, with about 72% being victims of sex trafficking and 10% being victims of labor trafficking. In cases where the type of recruitment was known, 42% of victims were recruited by a family member, while 39% were recruited by an intimate partner. So again, they're not being recruited and abducted and sold overseas. They're being, sold by people that are intimate in their life. So although these stats are from 2020, there was another important statistic from that year. So during the COVID lockdown, Polaris saw that online recruitment increased a significant 22%. So during the lockdown, while everybody was locked in their home, common recruitment sites such as strip clubs, foster homes, and schools went down drastically, but online recruitment really increased, and we continue to see that increase today. Next slide. If you could just click it one more time. There's a little red, yep. So on the screen is a graphic that shows the age at the time sex or labor trafficking first began, and you can see that red circle kind of shows the peak age. So for sex trafficking, the average time that the trafficking first began was 17, and for labor trafficking, the average age was 22. The important thing to keep in mind about this number is this is not when this was first reported to the police or this first became a crime. This is from interviews with victims identifying when did that first begin. So they may have been involved in labor trafficking or sex trafficking for some amount of time before it was eventually reported, but that is the average age at which it first began. Next slide. So the map on the screen shows the portions of the United States that have the greatest incidence of human trafficking. And I always think this is an interesting graphic to show because you see that it's really concentrated, on the West Coast a little bit, but really concentrated on the East Coast. And the interstate system really allows sex traffickers to move along the eastern states, particularly with I-95. So it runs through, obviously, major cities, and that keeps Delaware a vital route to transport victims between those states. The other important thing to keep in mind when looking at a map like this is that you're able to avoid deception easier in states like Delaware. So if you look at Texas, it's a huge state. It's going to take hours to travel from one part of the county to another part of the county in Texas. But in Delaware, you can travel for 2 hours and you can be in Pennsylvania, or you can be in New Jersey, or you can be in Maryland. So if there's somebody in Delaware that comes on police radar for being involved in trafficking, they can easily pick up shop, whether it's something like an online recruitment, somebody posting ads, or if it's something like an illicit massage establishment. If they come on police radar, they can easily pick up shop and move 2 hours and be completely outside of that police jurisdiction. Whereas in Texas, to pick up shop, you may have to drive a day to be outside of that police jurisdiction. So that's something that's important to keep in mind, and it's something that we see a lot too, especially in the illicit massage industry, is that, you know, if we shut one down, it pops up again in another county pretty close by, or it pops up right over state lines. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Also want to add to that, one of the cases I investigated involved the FBI. It was a juvenile trafficking case. So, talking about Delaware being small, Caroline Brigham was correct for that. So, what they'll do is they'll transport the children over the state line, whether they know that the police are on them or not. So, they'll stay in one spot for a little bit. And so, this case in particular, the children were transported over state line into Baltimore County, and back to Delaware, and then to Ocean City, back to Delaware. So it goes over state line. So our federal partners are a huge help. Same with the case I had with Homeland Security. It was involving adults. Same thing. I think this trafficker, he has been arrested. I just can't get into the details fully because it's currently in the court system. But the trafficker would go to Ocean City and find more survivors now, since we're able to locate a majority of them. So he would just jump from state to state to find more and have a bigger network. So it is very important because Delaware is small, and they do tend to jump states. And obviously our highways, I-95, going up and down the East Coast is huge.
Next slide. So on the screen is the Delaware Juvenile Trafficking Report from 2022. This is from the Office of the Child Advocate. So our office and the Delaware State Police work pretty closely with the Office of the Child Advocate. They track the juvenile trafficking referrals for the state, and this is the report from January 2022 to June of 2022. So as you can see in the report, there were 26 total victims identified, 13 of them being from Newcastle County, and then 13 combined between Kent and Sussex. 20 of those were females and 6 were males. And we've really seen just this number explode even since that report came out. The number has definitely increased with more awareness. Agencies, are just becoming more aware of the screening for human trafficking. The Division of Family Services has a tool called the See It tool, Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool, and that tool is kind of a grading system in which they're able to look at different factors and determine whether the person is at risk, possibly at risk, definitely at risk, and that's what leads to these juvenile trafficking reports.
So I want to add to this too. I don't want these numbers to reflect, obviously, eventually we would like to see all of these numbers be zero. We don't want any trafficking victims, and especially in the state of Delaware where we have 2 trafficking detectives per county. So with these numbers, they have exploded, unfortunately. So what we're doing is we're working with a multidisciplinary team, MDT. We all work very well together. That includes the Department of Justice, DFS, social workers. Anytime that a trafficking case comes out, we immediately jump on it. And now, being the coordinator, I'm able to see where these cases are going. So I make sure, and it's not saying that every case that comes out is going to be trafficking, but there is, like Caroline said, trafficking concerns. So what I'll make sure the detectives are doing with the Delaware State Police is we're going out and talking to these juveniles or potential trafficking victims just to make sure that they're okay. And sometimes they won't even come off and tell you right away what's going on because they're scared or they're just not ready to come forward. But I do want to know that we are out there making sure that we're talking to every single juvenile or adult to make sure with the trafficking concerns and making sure they're okay.
And that is important to note. So even though there are, an increase in the number of referrals we're receiving, it's not exactly an increase in the prosecutions. A lot of the cases are risk of trafficking or suspicious behavior that leads to a trafficking referral. But the important thing to note is that even with just that risk of trafficking or that suspicious behavior, that law enforcement is getting involved and our office is getting involved, and we're able to track those cases. Some of those cases do lead to trafficking prosecutions, but otherwise they're at least on our radar in case they do lead to trafficking down the road. It's also an early way to be able to kind of have an intervention with those individuals and be able to get them the resources and the help that they need early on. Some people aren't willing to accept that help, but it's at least an opportunity for a police officer to talk to that person and address those concerns. Next slide, please. So first we're going to talk about labor trafficking. On the screen are some general indicators of labor trafficking, and some common industries where labor trafficking takes place could include places like poultry, processing plants, construction, landscaping, hospitality, domestic work, and agricultural. So on the screen are some general indicators. Workplace abuse and restrictions. The victim owes a large debt that they're unable to pay off. The victim is not in control of his or her own ID or Social Security or passport documents. They may have been recruited through a false promise. They may have thought they were coming over for some type of work or hired for some type of work, and then the work ends up being completely different, and they are often unpaid or paid very little. So those are just some indicators to keep in mind as it relates to labor trafficking. Next slide, please. On the screen are top 5 risk factors, like vulnerabilities for labor trafficking victims. So recent migration or relocation to the area. The important thing to keep in mind here is that traffickers are trying to identify a vulnerability and take and use that vulnerability against that victim. So if they recently relocated to the area, they don't know the area, that puts them at risk of trafficking. Self-reported economic hardship, unstable housing, a criminal record or criminal history, and a substance use concern. We definitely see that a lot with the increase in substance abuse and people addicted to illicit drugs and traffickers using that vulnerability to control their victim.
So I want to go back to that case I was telling you guys about with Homeland Security. They recently also, on top of the human trafficking charges, they did labor trafficking. So I asked them why they were doing labor trafficking, because at one point in the investigation, they had asked me for all the reports with some of the survivors that were involved with shoplifting. So I was able to pull all of their shoplifting reports, and I provided that to them. So I guess the way that their statute is written, not only were they being sex trafficked, but they were coerced into going into numerous stores throughout Sussex and Kent County to steal items, bring them back, which all of the funds after that, I guess they would sell them, sell the product they stole, and all the profit would go to the trafficker. So that's one add in there about labor trafficking. It could be a dual case, sex and labor.
So on the screen is a labor trafficking investigation from last year. It's the case name is State vs. Martin Ortiz Lozano. It was a case out of Ellesmere. The police initially responded to AI DuPont for allegations of child abuse. Contact was made with a juvenile who had serious injuries in various stages of healing, and he said that those injuries were inflicted by his father. He revealed in an interview that he had moved to the United States 8 months prior, and he reported working every day with all the proceeds going to his father. He wasn't enrolled in school. He was told that since it cost a lot of money to bring him here, that he would have to do the work without getting paid. So in this case, it came in as a child abuse case, but because of the allegations of working and being forced to work and not getting paid, and because of his young age, it's also a labor trafficking case. Martin Ortiz Lozano pled to 2 counts of child abuse first degree and 2 counts of human trafficking of a minor. He has not been sentenced yet. I believe his sentencing is in the next couple months, but he's facing anywhere from 6 to 75 years in jail. So that was a recent labor trafficking case that was handled by a special victims unit, DAG, a Deputy Attorney General in our office, along with a prosecutor from our human trafficking unit. Next slide, please. So next we're going to kind of segue into sex trafficking. On the screen are some forms of sexual servitude and some industries that could facilitate sex trafficking. So massage parlors, which we call illicit massage establishments or attendees, escort services, adult bookstores, modeling studios, bars and strip clubs, and online exploitation. The other arena where we definitely see sexual servitude, but I don't have it up here, is intrafamilial, sex trafficking. So a parent, trafficking their child to individuals for money. On the screen is a clip from Backpage.com. So Backpage.com was a classified advertising website. It was once known as the world's top online brothel, and it was in existence for about a decade, and it was really the world's largest sex trafficking operation. So every day, all day, in cities across the world, Backpage ran thousands of listings. And a lot of those listings did involve advertisements for children. The website was involved in nearly 3/4 of the 10,000 child trafficking reports received by NCMEC. NCMEC is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Thankfully, the website was seized. It was shut down by the federal government in April of 2018, but in its place are just other websites, unfortunately. So although Backpage was shut down, many other sites with illicit content featuring children has popped up. So there's other websites like Skip the Games, City Guide, Escort Alligator, just to name a few. Those are all sites that we're aware of in our office, and the police agencies are aware of, and we monitor those sites to try and determine if there are individuals on those sites. There is actually a resource for law enforcement called Spotlight. It runs through all the sites, all the illicit sites, and it puts everything into this one website. So instead of us going to City Guide and then going to Escort Alligator, we can just go to Spotlight and we can monitor all of the ads that come through. And Spotlight's able to do like a facial recognition to flag people that they believe are juveniles. They're not always juveniles, but it's definitely a helpful tool. So Spotlight's definitely been a great resource for us. It shows you how many times the ad has been posted. It shows you if the ad's been posted in different areas. So sometimes we'll see ads that have been posted in 500 cities. Well, that's probably some type of scam ad. But if we're seeing ads that are just posted here, in Wilmington or in Sussex County or Kent County, we know that that's more likely that's a real person on the other side. That's not a scam.
So from a detective standpoint of using Spotlight, I was actually using it earlier for a case we have going on right now. So what I look for when I use Spotlight, it runs like 10 different ad websites. So if I'm looking at a photo and the female is, or male, is, you can see that somebody else is taking a picture other than themselves, that's a good indicator that they could have a trafficker, since obviously they're not taking their own photos. We ran into that on a few of our cases. We were able to use that because the photos that were being posted on a couple different websites, you could definitely tell if somebody else was taking a photo. You got to find out if it's definitely true. So I wanted to add that in.
The other thing about Spotlight, that you're able to upload photos of missing children, and they're able to run them through the ads to see if they can, through facial recognition, identify anybody that looks like that individual. So that's an important tool through Spotlight. Another thing that we look at when we're looking at ads in Spotlight is if there's multiple individuals that are posting using the same phone number. So I should have put a picture of what it looks like in Spotlight, but in Spotlight we can see all the ads and then we can click on the phone number. And if that phone number leads you to multiple ads for multiple different females, well then that could be a trafficking situation, because why would all these females be using the same phone number? So that's really a great resource that our office is able to use. Delaware State Police is able to use. We have officers with probation and parole that track the site daily. So it's something that law enforcement, I don't know when it started. I just became aware of it when I transferred to the Human Trafficking Unit, but it really is a great tool. I actually read online that Ashton Kutcher funds it. He's an actor, and it's kind of a thing that he's involved in is human trafficking work. Next slide, please. So on the screen are some indicators of sex trafficking, so evidence of controlling or dominating relationships, signs of physical and or sexual abuse, lack of control of your own money or finances, signs of drug and alcohol abuse, and inappropriate dress. Some other signs could obviously be, malnutrition, dehydration, sexually transmitted diseases. Another thing, a chaperone or translator at all medical appointments. So this could be a trafficker acting as a friend, and also tattoos or branding, which we'll go over a little bit more on another slide. Next slide, please. So on the screen, it's just kind of a breakdown of the difference between prostitution and trafficking. So prostitution is a crime. It is illegal here in the state, but it is a voluntary act. Prostitutes keep all of their earnings, or they may have a small business arrangement for security or managing clients. A prostitute can leave their situation at any time, theoretically, and they usually serve enough clients to meet their financial needs, 4 to 5 clients a day. In Delaware, it's usually actually like 2 to 3 clients a day. And what you'll see is that in prostitution, the person's only going to service the amount of clients that they need to last through that day. So they may, need to pay for their hotel for that night. They may need to pay for food. They may need to pay for drugs. But after whatever their daily living expenses are met, they're not going to continue to service more clients. And that's definitely the difference with trafficking. So in trafficking, the trafficker is taking all or most of the money, and the victim has high quotas to meet. So on average, 20 clients a day, and they're not keeping that money. Their trafficker is keeping that money. Next slide. State versus George Curtis is another sex trafficking investigation from this past year. So it was a Kent County case. The defendant was arrested after investigation found that while serving as a photographer for an illicit photo shoot, he repeatedly made unwanted sexual contact with the victim, eventually raping her and uploading footage of the assault to the internet, advertising the victim for sexual services. As I said, this was a Kent County case. It was handled by a prosecutor in our Internet Crimes Against Children unit and also the Human Trafficking unit. He pled to 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct against a child and 2 counts of human trafficking or a minor. He is also pending sentencing. He was a convicted sex offender from a 2013 case, I believe it was, so he's facing some enhanced penalties for that as well. But this is really kind of one of the areas where we see these cases. The victim here, she was contacted over social media. The person said, "Oh, you look pretty. Do you want to come in for a photo shoot?" And came in for the photo shoot, and then this occurred. So that case is pending sentencing. Next slide. I have a couple other cases that I'm going to kind of breeze through because I want to get to some other material. But on the screen was a human trafficking case. This one was from 2017. It involved a 16-year-old female and a 17-year-old female, and the adults were posting them available on that Backpage website that I had talked about was taken down. So they were also convicted of human trafficking. Next slide, please. On the screen is another press release. This was an older case, 2016, but it was also a human trafficking case involving the website Backpage. So Marcus was posting prostitution advertisements for 3 juvenile victims, and he was taking the money and controlling them through their access to heroin. So they were addicted, and he was controlling their access in order to gain control of the victims. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about illicit massage establishments and how that plays into human trafficking. So illicit massage establishments, it's estimated $2.5 billion annual revenue. There are more than 9,000 of them currently operating in the United States. Most of them are linked to at least one other non-massage venue, whether it's a nail salon or a dry cleaner. And these connections are used to be able to move the women from business to business, but also to launder their proceeds from the business. So not all commercial sex and illicit massage establishments is human trafficking. There has to be that component of force, fraud, or coercion. We know where the illicit massage establishments are in Delaware. There's probably, I think there were 75 last year. I think we're down in the 60s this year. New ones pop up every once in a while. We know where they are. We are actively trying to work on them with Delaware State Police, with municipal agencies. Our office works with the Division of Professional Regulations, DPR. They license these massage parlors, or some of them. Not all of them actually get licensed or seek licensing. So we've worked with DPR to shut some of them down that aren't following the proper licensing. We've worked with landlords to make them aware of who they're renting to, because there really is some responsibility on the landlord's part as well, instead of just collecting the rent each month from this illegal activity. Next slide. On the screen are just some common indicators that you may see in these illicit massage establishments. So if the price is significantly below market value, I know I made a massage appointment today and it's $130 for an hour. You are not going to see $130 for an hour at these massage establishments. So the women in these establishments may report that they need a large tip. They're oftentimes working for just the tip money. There's almost always a red open sign at these establishments. I swear every single one of them has that red open sign. A lot of them have covered windows, and they have long hours. They may be open from 8 to 11, which is not common of a non-illicit massage establishment. And a lot of them have kind of counter surveillance techniques. They have cameras outside the facility, which isn't very common, but is something that we see in the illicit massage business. We work with the Division of Professional Regulations in shutting these places down, because simple things like staying open beyond certain hours should be an infraction, or having to be buzzed to be let in is an issue, or covering the windows is an issue. Those are all infractions that DPR can file violations for.
So a couple things I want to add to the massage parlors. One thing that I've noticed is that they will transport girls between each massage parlor if it's the same owner. They'll keep rotating them, which will allow customers to be able to, pick different girls. So one thing that we're, as Delaware State Police, working on is we use Spotlight, and we also have some other accounts. We're able to see all of these different massage parlors. We do keep an eye. We're trying to keep an eye on all of them. Eventually, we would like to get down to 0, which I know is unreasonable, but we would like to start shutting them down. We are currently working on quite a few, so from our perspective, we definitely like to use every resource we can to start shutting these down. And it may not always be a search warrant and arrest, but the professional licensing, she uses those people to help shut them down. But I also want to tell you a funny story about a massage parlor we did a search warrant on in Felton. So the reason I started to know that these were posted on Skip the Games was that there was a male subject in there to get a massage. We pulled him outside, talked to him, he allowed us to go to his phone, and as soon as I clicked on the internet, the first thing that popped up was Skip the Games. He told me that he was there for a legitimate massage. Obviously, he was not. So when I asked him about why he had Skip the Games up, and the ad for the massage parlor was on Skip the Games, he said it's not illegal to look at porn. So, needless to say, they know what they're looking for, which turned me on to noticing that these massage parlors are posting on all the same websites that traffickers are.
Next slide, please. So in February of this year, our office, and working in conjunction with Delaware State Police and other agencies, we were able to indict 3 people in Newcastle County for running a ring of illicit massage establishments. So it was Rainbow 7, Bloom Head to Toe, and Massage Royal Spa. We were able to charge them with racketeering, conspiracy to commit racketeering, human trafficking, promoting prostitution, money laundering, criminal nuisance, among various other charges. And we were able to uncover that from March 2020 until February 2023, the trio was running this ring of massage parlors. The search warrants at the parlors revealed that the female victims were living at the establishments. They were living in close quarters and in unsanitary living conditions. They were working long hours and working 7 days a week. We were also able to determine that the organization made over $300,000 in cash deposits across multiple bank accounts, despite filing for unemployment and Medicaid benefits. So there were charges for that as well, and that case is still pending. Next slide, please. So brothels was another thing that we wanted to talk about as it relates to sex trafficking. So residential brothels are typically informal underground businesses operating out of residential and non-commercial areas. They may be located in homes or apartment complexes. Some indicators in brothels are there's large amounts of cash and condoms, there's customer logbooks, one for the house and one for the victims, sparse rooms, and men that come and go frequently. On the next slide, please, you'll see a ledger that was found during a search warrant at one of these brothels. So L and N, those were the Spanish days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The search warrant was executed on Thursday. On Monday, the female serviced 38 men. On Tuesday, she serviced 29 men. And on Wednesday, she serviced 28 men. For a total of 85 men at $35. She made $2,975, but none of that came to her. So that was a brothel that was in Georgetown that was investigated. Next slide, please. That brothel originally came onto the police radar because the property owner, the residents, had hired somebody to go out to his rental property to complete home improvement work to damage windows. When the person got there, he thought it was odd that the windows were covered. And when he approached, there was an Hispanic male that had 3 phones that brought him into the residence. There was a language barrier, so he followed the male inside. And when he entered the room, he observed 5 to 6 Hispanic females on the floor of the room, all unclothed and in a line. And he believes it was intended that he was supposed to pick one. So he was confused, upset, he fled, he called the property owner, and the property owner called the police. Through some surveillance and trying to figure out more about the case, the police were able to go out there and execute a search warrant, but it was a few days later and those women had already been cycled out. There were other women there, but not the 5 to 6 women initially reported. Next slide, please. So on the screen are some examples of tattoos and branding that we see in human trafficking cases. So as Detective Yenser said in the one case, there was a crown with the other individual's name underneath of it. We also see kind of the chains or the barcode or roses or diamonds. Those are the common indicators of human trafficking. Next slide, please. I'm going to speed up because I know it is almost Yolanda's turn to come up here. So just briefly to cover the trafficked person, the important thing to keep in mind here in coming to this presentation today is that the victim can really be anybody, regardless of their citizenship status, their country of origin, their sex. They likely have a vulnerability that the trafficker is exploiting. The trafficker will identify that vulnerability and they will exploit that vulnerability. So it could be any of the things covered on the screen. A lot of times we see addiction. Runaways and at-risk youth are often targeted by traffickers for exploitation. They're skilled at manipulating child victims and maintaining control. Next slide. Some victim issues to keep in mind is that the victim may not identify themselves as a victim. We've seen this in cases where, the police have talked to the person and, Division of Family Services has talked to the person and they don't really understand the situation that they're in because of their youth. They don't understand that they're being trafficked. So they may not identify as a victim up front. Some other issues, they may not speak English. They may be told to lie or use reverse stories. They may be afraid of police, just culturally conditioned to fear law enforcement and not willing to speak with them. And they may also return to their trafficker time and time again.
I'll make this quick. So I had a juvenile case, and it was the domestic-related one I was talking about earlier. Going back to that, when we did the forensic interview with the female juvenile part of this case, the interview took between 4 and 5 hours. And at first, because she didn't want to think that anything was wrong with her family. So it is tough when it comes to especially kids and domestic-related cases.
Next slide, please. So just briefly, obviously the impact of being in these situations, the impact of the trauma that the victims are in. They may be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, memory disruption, so they may have a disjointed memory and an inability to recall the traumatic events accurately. They may have trauma bonding. They may have a demonstrated loyalty to their trafficker and an unwillingness to report or testify against their trafficker. Next slide, please. And then if you could skip to the next one, please. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware that Delaware is a mandatory reporter state. If Delaware law mandates any person in the below entities is required to make an immediate oral report to the Division of Family Services if they suspect child abuse or neglect. That's something important for people to keep in mind about the mandatory reporting. It covers physicians, persons in the healing arts, school employees, medical examiners, hospital, or other healthcare institutions, law enforcement agencies. So there is a toll-free number. It's a 24-hour day, 365-day a year number where you can make an oral report if you suspect child abuse or neglect, which covers human trafficking. Next slide, please. I'm actually going to skip the next 3 slides because Yolanda is here to talk about her foundation. Okay, so Polaris Hotline, this is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Since 2007, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has been operated by Polaris. They are the leader in the fight to eradicate human trafficking. The funding is provided by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When these hotlines come in, they are reported by email to law enforcement and to our office, so we receive them that way. But it's important to know that information on how to report those tips. Next slide. So on the screen, I just kind of listed out, I know that Senator Pettyjohn had asked, what were some hindrances to successful prosecution, and thinking about that and preparing for this PowerPoint, these were just some issues. Significant underreporting and lack of awareness about, what is human trafficking. Many cases may require numerous state, local, and federal agencies to work together, which can be difficult to navigate, but is also helpful because we are a small state. We work great with, local municipal agencies and Delaware State Police and FBI and Homeland Security. So it may be difficult to navigate, but the more resources, the better. The laws associated are relatively new. As I said, it's only been a crime at the state level for 9 years. The kind of work that some of the victims do, like agricultural jobs or service jobs, even though they're legal in nature, their working conditions may be what makes it constitute as human trafficking. So it's just harder to try and develop a case and understand what's actually going on behind the scenes. Other agencies are still catching up and just now establishing human trafficking designated employees. So, our office just created the Human Trafficking Unit in January 2022. Delaware State Police has a Human Trafficking Coordinator, and then they have Human Trafficking designated detectives in each county. There's other agencies that we work with, like the Division of Labor. They just assigned a Human Trafficking specified person. The Division of Professional Regulations, they have people that work on these cases with us. So the more that these agencies have somebody that's focused on human trafficking is really helpful. The victims are dealing with complex trauma, which I went over a little bit, and also just kind of determining what is prostitution versus what is actually trafficking. So we talked about those online ads, and there's an estimated 150,000 new ads posted daily across the country. So that's a lot of ads. On a state level, I don't have the number of new ads a day, but it's a lot. I mean, I can go on there and see the number of ads and the number of reposts. So for law enforcement to try and find the victims among this massive number of ads, and then try and research and identify who the victim is, and then also trying to determine whether there's force, fraud, or coercion if it's an adult. Next slide, please. So on the screen is just kind of what some things Delaware was doing to combat human trafficking. So as I mentioned, the creation of our unit I definitely think is helpful. There's the creation of the dual status youth program. So those are for juvenile individuals that are dually involved with juvenile justice and child welfare. Expansion of the Delaware Anti-Trafficking Action Council. It was formerly known as HTIC. It's now DATAC. We now have an executive director. We have a staff. So that is a helpful thing to have that agency funded. The Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool is a way to identify children who are being or have been sexually exploited. The creation of outreach and public awareness programs. We definitely see a need for events like this to kind of raise greater awareness. I know that our office did a presentation for the Office of Defense Counsel for all the public defenders. We did a training for the Department of Justice. We've done a training for the Moors, for their pediatric nurses. So just more awareness in more areas is definitely helpful. We've worked on some different legislation, hopefully legislation to increase the penalties for patronizing a prostitute, especially for patronizing a prostitute who's a minor. Last year, there was legislation passed to include victims of trafficking in the Address Confidentiality Act. There's legislation to create a greater increase in human trafficking awareness signs. I know the detectives are now being trained at the Academy on Human Trafficking. So if you're new to the Delaware State Police or you're new to the Academy, you're getting training in the Academy on Human Trafficking, so that's definitely helpful. Delaware also works with the Office of the Child Advocate through the Office of the Investigation Coordinator on those juvenile trafficking cases that we talked about earlier. Next slide. So how to get involved. So knowing the signs and the red flags, a lot of which we've talked about today. Reporting tips to the human trafficking hotline, just by raising awareness about what is human trafficking. Volunteering locally. There's a number of nonprofits, and I know Yolanda will talk about Zoe Ministries, but volunteering locally is definitely a way to get involved. Just staying informed. I know Wilmington University has a monthly webinar series on human trafficking, and we have great presenters come in. There's a Zoom option, so you're able to watch them online, and they're free, but it's a great way to learn more about human trafficking. And also just talking to your friends and family. So demand fuels exploitation. So just having a greater awareness about what human trafficking is something small that you can do to help. Next slide. That is the end. There is our contact information, our emails on the screen. If you have questions, we're happy to probably take them after Yolanda does her presentation. Does that work for you? Yep. But those are our emails. If you have questions or concerns, we are happy to talk further. Whew.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate both of you coming here. And we will have a Q&A after Yolanda's done. So don't go very far. Go back a slide real quick. This is one of the purposes of tonight, is knowing how to get involved to stop it. The slideshows tonight will be made available online, along with the recording of tonight's event. So you'll be able to review these again and then pass them along to your friends, to your neighbors. But this is important. I mean, you're here tonight. That's a big step. You want to learn how to recognize it and how to stop it. These are some of the things that you can do to get involved. So, again, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for starting to get involved in this. Let's continue being involved in it. I'd like to invite up our next speaker. She really doesn't need a whole lot of introduction for people that have been following the work that is being done to help survivors. And I use the term survivors of human trafficking. Yolanda and Zoe Ministries of Delaware has just done a phenomenal job over the years of providing wonderful support services for the men, the women, and the children that have survived human trafficking here in Delaware. I want to give her an opportunity to speak about the wraparound services for these individuals, and thank you so very much for joining us tonight, Yolanda.
Thank you, Senator Pettyjohn. If I can have you go back even another slide beyond the one that Senator Pettyjohn, beyond the one we just looked at. What is Delaware doing? That slide. When I started this work in 2012, when I formed the 501c3 known as Zoe Ministries, and I've been acting executive director since that time, none of these actions were taking place. In 2012, there was no discussion of trafficking in the state. We did not even have state legislation against trafficking. And we had no federal arrests or prosecutions under federal law, to my knowledge. So the fact that all of this has taken place, and as Caroline said, in the last decade, in less than 9 years, should encourage us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because this can be a really, really heavy topic. It can be hard to listen to. It can be hard to talk about. It can be hard to wrap our brains around, that somebody would actually sell another human being and exploit them, especially children. And when we consider the fact that human trafficking in the United States is the second largest criminal enterprise that we have in this country. It used to be third, and it has now surpassed drugs. I'm sorry, it surpassed weapons. It's now second only to drugs. And it's closing in quickly. Because with drugs and weapons, you can sell it one time. But a human body you can sell over and over and over and over again, until that person is either sick, dies, commits suicide, or is too sick to work. In the United States alone, it's a $32 billion a year industry, and climbing. And the United States is the #1 consumer of sex trafficking in the world. And when you consider the fact that the average age of entry is 15 to 17, we're looking at the 95 corridor being a hotbed, and the UN report a few years ago saying that between 300 and 400,000 kids every year in the U.S. are at risk for being trafficked. If we don't create a state that says you are not welcome here as a trafficker, then we create a safe haven on the 95 corridor for traffickers to come and exploit our kids, who then, without services, grow into adults and give away the brokenness that they have. So when people say to me, we don't have trafficking in our community, in our backyard, when you're talking about 400,000 kids every year in the U.S., and we have less than 100 beds in this country, for these kids with wraparound services. That's a huge problem. So we have 400,000 kids every year that keep growing into adults, giving away what they have without their trauma being addressed, and without healing and without wholeness. And those individuals are going to filter into all of our communities, and it will come back and bite us if we do not take care of this now. Sorry, I got really preachy. That was not supposed to be part of my presentation. Okay, I'm going to come back here and do what I'm supposed to do. Okay, you can go ahead and go to my slide. So I'm going to talk about some services in Delaware that we offer to address this for prevention, for education, for awareness. I am Dr. Yolanda Montgomery, and my husband Ken has joined me. Raise your hand, Ken. Say hello to everybody. He works with me full time in this work, and we are getting ready to open. After years, we are getting ready to open Delaware's first and only therapeutic residential home for girls with adults. So I will tell you a little bit more detail about that, but before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about our other services that we offer, and I'm going to talk about the other two nonprofits in Delaware that we partner with, that we are working alongside of Salvation Army. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So the three direct service providers are Salvation Army and Meet Me at the Well and Zoe Ministries. So you probably noticed as Caroline was skipping slides, these were the three that she was going to highlight because these are the three nonprofits doing the work. So we're going to start talking about the Salvation Army. If you want to go to the next slide. This I got directly off of their website. The name of their anti-trafficking program is Restoration Now, and they provide awareness and training, much like evenings like tonight. They are located upstate. They do community outreach, so they go to strip clubs. They go actually on the streets and do outreach for known prostitution areas. They go to hotels and motels, and they do a lot of community education. They also offer emergency housing. They are working on long-term housing, but right now they have emergency housing and case management, and all of their staff is trauma-informed. So these are the different services that they offer. And Salvation Army has been known over many years as one of the giants in our country that is fighting human trafficking. Next slide. This is more off of their website with Restoration Now. And the vision is to continue to build awareness of the human trafficking epidemic through outreach, training, and community partnerships, and to provide emergency shelter and trauma-informed case management care to the women that they serve. Next slide. And the statewide case manager director is Lauren Arnold. So I would encourage you to take a picture of this slide if you have any referrals for her or want to get to know more about their program, how you can get involved, how you can volunteer. Contact Lauren. Next slide. The other program is Meet Me at the Well, and they partner a lot with the Salvation Army. Salvation Army and Meet Me at the Well are helping to build the adult infrastructure for trafficking. Zoe Ministries is focusing on the minor infrastructure for trafficking, the infrastructure for minors who are trafficked. So they offer, their programs that they offer are trauma-informed yoga, mindfulness classes, healing through cooking classes, community connections, and health and beauty classes. So they offer this to survivors or those who have been impacted by exploitation. Next slide. So they have a lot of different health and wellness workshops, and they're also out in the community with the Salvation Army doing outreach as well. Next slide is their contact information. The executive director is Deanna Sukadolti, and she and Lauren and I all have sat on the DATAC that Caroline was talking about, the Delaware Anti-Trafficking Action Council, in different seats over the last probably probably 7 to 8 years. So the three of us work together really, really well, and we partner. And sometimes they have needs. They have women who have children who need backpacks and school supplies. And so sometimes Zoe Ministries can offer that. So we do a lot of partnerships together because we're the only three in the state that are nonprofits that are working on this issue. So next slide. So I'm going to now talk about my nonprofit. Zoe Ministries, we serve statewide, but we are located in Sussex County. And I'm going to show you some photos of the amazing house that God blessed us with in 2020, in the middle of COVID. And I'll show you some pictures. We have to leave the location undisclosed for safety purposes because we obviously are not going to tell the public where we're housing trafficked girls. But I do want to show you some pictures of the inside. So let's start with the first slide. And the first slide is actually, if this works, if we can actually play it, it is it's a video. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long, and it's on childhood sexual abuse. And we know that childhood sexual abuse puts girls and boys at 28 times higher risk for walking into the arms of a trafficker because their brains have already been trained that the person that loves me and is going to take care of me is going to hurt me, is going to sexually abuse me. And so when they run away from that, because the horror of that is too much, and they run right into the arms of a perpetrator, just like Caroline explained. And so their psyche's already been formed around the fact that whoever's going to take care of me and says they love me is going to harm me. So the work by the abuser in childhood has already been done. So this is a 2 to 3 minute video, and it has a number of human trafficking survivors in it as women who are talking about their experience. And I want you to make the link between the childhood sexual abuse and how their brains were trained and how they walked into the arms of a perpetrator without knowing it. So go ahead and play the video, please. While they're getting that figured out, I'll talk a little bit about what Caroline had mentioned too about trauma bonding, and that probably is one of the most frustrating aspects of encountering and engaging with survivors who have been trafficked, because research shows that they'll go back and return an average of 7 times before they finally are able to break free, because of the trauma bond that literally happens in their brains. It's not an emotion. Being trauma bonded to somebody, if you look at their brain on an MRI scan, it looks exactly the same as somebody who's addicted to heroin. Exactly the same, you can't tell a difference. So it's a physiological response to trauma, and it's a very toxic bond with a very toxic person. But you end up getting addicted to it. And that's why they continue to return. So law enforcement and service providers can pull this person out or invite this person out into, quote, what we see as freedom. And the first thing that this survivor wants to do is run back. And it can be really frustrating to spend all that time, money, energy, and resources to get this person out of the situation for them to run back the first chance they get. Are we good? Give me the thumbs up? All right, let's go ahead and play it.
never tell. I grew up in a household of violence. My father was an alcoholic, my mom was an alcoholic. I never witnessed those two fight each other verbally, but my stepdad, he was an abusive person, both to my mom and me and my sister. Physically and sexually to me and my sister. I would say when I look back now, there was a pattern going on. Little patterns. You know, starting out with the bathing at 6. Don't worry, I have the kids, you can go to the store. At 8, there were road trips that my mom didn't come on. So the pattern started building. I know that my sister protected me a lot of the times, and she endured more than I did just to protect me. So, growing up in it, I assumed it was normal.
At 7 years old, I began to get sexually abused by a close family member. And it's sad to say, but at that age, I recognized that there was value between my legs. And I say this because he was taking it, and he constantly took it, and he gave me rewards. So I knew, I say around 9, I got the concept that, okay, when he does this to me, he gives me something. It was never anything of any real value, but there was reward. It dinged really early. I just thought it was special. It was really special, and it was worth something. It was later reinforced by my mom, who says, as long as you have a vagina, you'll never be broke.
I was being babysat by a girl. We had a lot of people around the neighborhood who were kind of sketchy and on drugs, and there was a guy that lived across the street, and he just came into my room while I was sleeping and just abused me, and I didn't tell anybody. I just changed. I just changed. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel worthy at all.
Honestly, I think all the sexual abuse led me to not have self-worth. So, and knowing that, and knowing my body is just a commodity, knowing that, you know, I got to being like, this is all they want, so if this is all they want, they're gonna pay for it. The best case scenario was the prostitution to make money and to take care of myself. Like, it had been happening anyway. I didn't feel any worth. I didn't care. It hurt. I detached. I wasn't there most of the time. But it's been happening since 7, so what's new? There was nothing new. Different face, different place.
So you hear the common denominator there of lack of self-worth, right? So you can take an individual out of their situation. We can take them out of a brothel. We can take them out of the illicit massage parlor. But what do they bring with them? Right? Their lack of self-worth. That's a mark that's left there. So you can say that, you know, it absolutely starts with taking the person out of the situation. But taking them out is not enough. We have to address the trauma now. That is layers and layers and layers, because it's complex trauma. That's what causes the PTSD. And it's a lack of value, inherent value that they feel like they no longer have. That takes time, that takes relationship, that takes therapy, it takes wraparound services, it takes comprehension care of that individual's needs, mind, body, and spirit. So when I talk about residential therapeutic care and what we're doing with these kids, that's what we're addressing when they come to live in our home. We're not just giving them a safe place to live, but we are addressing all of those aspects of who they are and dealing with that complex trauma. with highly trained and trauma-informed staff. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll skip this because Caroline already talked about that. So part of Zoe's programming includes Power Over Predators, which is preventive education for youth. We have an equine mentorship program. We have a Moxie mentorship, was like a traditional mentorship that you would think of as one-on-one with an adult. We have a RISE program. We have community awareness, so we do a lot of presentations like this. And then we also do professional training. So I'm going to show you a slide on each one of these to talk a little bit more about it so you're a little more familiar with Zoe. Next slide. So our Power Over Predators program has 12 different sessions to it. It can be done in an hour and a half in a school setting, but often what we find is that we'll get calls from DFS and they just want us to work one-on-one with a kid. So we will meet, we'll go to Stevenson House, we'll go to the cottages, we'll go to Murphy School, and we meet one-on-one often with these kiddos, and we'll talk about a lot of the different topics that I think I have listed. But it was meant for schools, for middle schools and high schools. But we've had a lot of difficulty getting into schools in Delaware. So we've started doing Boys and Girls Clubs and youth groups and just doing one-on-ones with DFS kids. Next slide. So we also have an equine mentorship program, and this is designed for participants who are ages 12 and up in need of confidential support. So these do not have to be individuals who were trafficked. It can be absolutely anybody that needs support. It can be a kid whose parents are going through a divorce. Any child in foster care who already has a trauma in their background would benefit from this. Kids who have depression or anxiety or are struggling in school. So if you know of a kid that you think would benefit from this program, we would love to include them. And if you are interested in becoming a mentor in this program, please contact us. We have a pretty stringent vetting process for this. We also have a lot of training for this. So if this is something that you're interested in, please contact us and let us know. So we build a relationship between the session leader, the participant, and a horse. And the kids love this program because they're not sitting across from an adult talking. It's a very organic way to just have conversation while you're brushing the horse or you're doing horse chores or riding or whatever. Next slide. So these are two of our participants. We have two different farms. So we partner with private farm owners. We have one in Townsend, and we also have one in the Harbison-Milton area. And these private farm owners lease us their farm for $1 a year so that we can use their horses. Both of these farms have between 7 and 10 horses. So they allow our mentors to come on site and meet with these kids in their farms. And we don't necessarily offer riding lessons, but kids can learn to ride in the program if they want to. But most of it is groundwork with the equine. Next slide. So every session that we have in equine mentorship, and every time we do a Power Over Predators presentation, we do trafficking prevention. So these are the different points that we talk about. We talk to them about what trafficking is. So we tell them it's not the movie Taken. This is what it looks like, and this is how you could be lured. We talk about who the traffickers are and what their motivation is. We talk about how do they target. Why might they be a target? We talk about the internet. We talk about why might they target you? What are your voids in your life that they might try to hone in on? We talk about healthy and unhealthy relationships. We talk about red flags of trafficking. We talk about abuse. And then we cover the trauma in the brain part in a adolescent sort of way. And they find that really, really fascinating. And then we talk about hope, because a lot of this is really, really heavy. But we talk about the hope that they have now to protect themselves and their friends from potentially being lured into a situation like this. Next slide. So in our Moxie mentorship, that's our traditional mentorship program. That also is one-on-one, but there is an age range between 12 and 25. It's 10 weeks, and every session is 60 to 75 minutes. And out of that 12-week period, there's 2 group activities that we do with the kids at the beginning, usually the middle and the end of the 12-week, 10-week session. So I forgot to mention our Equine Mentorship Program that runs in the spring and fall. And those are each 12-week sessions. So we're in I believe our 4th or 5th week right now, so we'll start again the end of next March. So it might be too late to get in for this fall, but if you know kids and you contact us, we can sign them up for the March session. Next slide. So we do community awareness. So if you have a group, a civic club, youth group, if you're part of a hospital, if you're part of a school, part of a church, and you want us to come do an hour-long presentation, this is what human trafficking looks like in Delaware, a lot like what we did tonight. We are available for that. Next slide. I also do professional trainings. I am a nurse, and I have my doctorate in counseling and trauma, so I do a lot of mental behavioral health trainings, specifically on neurobiology of trauma, nursing and medical symposiums. I have helped co-train with law enforcement, the judges retreat. So there are a lot of professional trainings that we've done throughout the state as well. Next slide. So this is what I'm really excited about. This is our residential treatment that we have been working on for the last 3 years. So I have to tell you, I don't know how much time I have, but this is a really cool story, and so I'm going to try to keep it to 5 minutes. So we found this property, and I'm not going to show you the house for security purposes, but we found this property that was over 20 acres. And I knew that it was the place we were supposed to be. I'm a woman of faith, and so I pray a lot. And so I felt like this was the place that God told us is going to be yours. And it's going to be Zoe Ministries, and we named it Hannah's House. And so I believe that property was supposed to be ours for Hannah's House. And so in January, before COVID hit, I had gone to a few funders, and I said, look, we found this house at $627,000, and if 3 of you donate XYZ, we can purchase this, and this will be the first of its kind in Delaware. And they were really excited about it. And we were supposed to submit our applications in April and May. But then March came, and COVID came, and it shut down all funding. And so there was no money available. Now, the woman that owned this told us that she would hold it for us for 6 months to raise the money. So January, February, March, our first 3 months were gone, and we had $5,000 raised. And no money was being given out because everything was going to COVID relief. So you talk about starting to pray. I was praying. And the day before the 6 months was up, we still had $5,000. And I called this woman and I said, this is not looking good, and I would really like to come spend the night so I can say goodbye to this place, because it's looking like we're not gonna get it. And so I spent the night there crying and praying, didn't sleep hardly at all, and left the next morning, gave her a hug, and I said, I'll let you know by 6 or 7 tonight what's going on. The whole day goes by, nothing happens. 5 o'clock that night, I called another group that I had been mentored by that does a lot of the same work out in Ohio, and I said, I need a Zoom call because I'm falling apart here. And so I called them. We Zoomed for 45 minutes or so, and I got a phone call that I didn't answer in the middle of that because we were praying at the end of the phone call, so I wasn't going to take the call. And so we get off the phone, off the Zoom call. I listen to my voicemail that leads to an email, that leads to another email, that leads to a phone call that led to a private donor that wanted to remain anonymous that donated $625,000 that night for us to get it. So nobody can convince me there is not a God that does not have his hand in this work. So, we now own the property, and I went back to those funders and said, look what God just did. Do you want to be a part of what he is doing in Delaware? Because if you do, we need money for renovations. And they did. They gave us money for renovations. And so for the last 2.5 years, we have been working on renovating one of the outbuildings that was just an empty shell that now houses our office staff, a counseling room, a conference room, a kitchen, a gym for the girls, a bathroom for the girls, and a schoolroom for the girls. And then we added a residential director office in the house and added a bathroom and bedroom and sitting area, which you're going to see here in just a minute. So we will serve youth statewide, and we very well may open to other states depending on what DFS sends us, but we'll be licensed for 6. That's sort of the sweet spot. We have enough bedrooms that we could go up to 10, but we know that with the complex trauma, with 6 teenage girls, that's going to be a lot to handle. So we're going to start with 2, and we're going to keep it at 2 for several months until we can kind of work out our kinks and kind of get a feel for what we're doing, because we're blazing a trail here, and we don't have anybody in front of us saying, this is what you need to do in Delaware. So we will be accepting females who are ages 12 to 17, and I'm going to believe that we're going to open this fall before December 31st. That's what I'm going to believe. But a lot of it depends on the Office of Child Care Licensing. So they rewrote regulations that had been in effect for decades. And the year we wanted to get licensed, they decided it was a great time to rewrite regulations. And so they started rewriting in January. And the new regulations are supposed to be out in October. So when the new regulations come out, we have to make sure that we're in 100% compliance with that before they will give us our license. So that's our next hurdle. But when God provides $625,000 in one night, this licensing thing is not going to be an issue. So anyway, let's look at pictures. So go to the next slide. So this is the outbuilding I was telling you about. It looked just like this back barn. It was nothing except one door in it. And it was the woman's husband. He had a shop, so it was full of tractor parts and old car parts and all kinds of old wood. And we emptied all of that out. And now this is even an old picture, because now that whole entire driveway is now paved with asphalt. We now have security cameras, we have a security gate, all of the renovations inside, everything is completely done and furnished. Next slide. So this is the inside of the house. On the left is the living room that goes up to a loft, and then that room obviously is the kitchen. Next slide. This is one of the bedrooms. We will have 2 twin beds, so we'll take 2 girls in each bedroom. So there's 2 bedrooms downstairs, and then we added a bedroom upstairs. And with every bedroom, there's a bathroom. So 2 girls to a room, and those 2 girls will share a bathroom. Next slide. So this is actually the upstairs bedroom. Next slide. This is our dining room that goes up to another area where the sitting area is for our nighttime staff, because that's where our other bedroom and bathroom is, and we have a large storage area up there as well. And then we have an extra room for kiddos if they get sick or COVID or something. Next slide. And this is the sitting room that will be for our staff, who will do 4 checks an hour during the night. So there's not going to be any sleeping at nighttime. They're going to be up doing room checks every hour 4 times. Next slide. I think that might be the end. So this is my contact information. Feel free to take a picture of that. Visit our website to learn more about any of our programs, or to sign up for any of our programs, or to volunteer. or to find out what upcoming events that we have or will be presenting. So I am going to thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you all being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Senator Pettyjohn.
Okay, now it's time for probably the best part of the meeting. That's going to be the Q&A. So what I'd like to do, we can get one of the other mics down here that's in the basket, make sure that works. If you'd like to come up to the front here and ask your questions, we'll have, I guess, all three up here to answer these questions. I would like to remind everybody that we want to stick to the subject of the forum here tonight, human trafficking. So stay with that. This isn't the time for statements or ramblings on about things. We want to really make sure that people are informed about human trafficking, what they can do to help. What they can do to help, and how we can make these numbers zero here in Delaware. So I'll leave it with you. And this isn't on yet. Okay. There we go. There we go. All right. So who wants to come up first and ask some questions? I know there's somebody.
All right, just go up there or down from here?
Bring it down.
My question's to the detective, all right?
That'd be the first.
Law enforcement, believe me, I thank you. Stay safe. All right, that's my first thing for you. But you talked about the state lines, Jersey, Pennsylvania. You didn't mention Virginia, but Virginia and Maryland. Do you have working partners? Now, let's say you got somebody in particular you're tracking, all right? And you know they went somewhere in one of those 4 areas. Do you have working partners where they can help you track them?
Yes, absolutely. So I have partners in surrounding states, other troopers. But I tell you, our biggest resource that we would use if we're going multi-jurisdictional would be the FBI. They've been a huge help to me with numerous cases. They have many more resources than we have, and they are definitely a huge help when it comes to tracking somebody down. So we can definitely keep better eyes on them if we get the federal feds involved. And that includes Homeland Security, too. They're really great at that. But I do have contacts, or we keep contacts with other states. And so we have a human trafficking conference in Ocean City. So there's a lot of states on the East Coast. I think we even had Texas show up. And we have networking afterwards. So what we do is we swap each other's phone numbers, just in case we got to reach out to them for any issues in other states.
I'm not sure if I got much any questions here, but what I wanted to say was I kind of jotted some things down, and totally blows my mind. 9 years. Yeah. 9 years. Okay? I'm furious, right? And I'm sure you guys are too. But thank you for what you're doing, and God bless you. Okay? Law enforcement. I don't know how to put this, and you may not like this, but you're not, no, don't smile. Not too much of my favorite, okay? I dispatched 20 years ago, okay? And now, all right? Politicians, we need to get off our asses. We need to stop trying to please people, and we need to do this for our hearts, not for society and not for the way things are run. We need to get off this. And we need to do this for humanity, for God. Yes, I'm sorry. So, I'm just trying to say we really need to do this for that. So, what are we going to do more of this? We need to get these into the schools. We need to get out here. Do you have a flyer that I know you've got the information up with the phone numbers, but do we have like a physical flyer that we can give out, that people of us can get these and make copies, and we can go around in the churches, and we can get more of these out here, because everybody needs to be involved with this. This is just crazy. We need to make more awareness, and that's the only thing we're going to do. So, but I do apologize.
We do have, I know Delaware Anti-Trafficking Action Council has lots of different materials that we pass out at different awareness events.
So do you have any here?
I personally do not have any here, but I know that is something that, we do have when people come out to different awareness events. We have different materials that, are available that we can get to you.
If you can get some of that to me when we do the posting with the video of this, I'll make sure that those flyers, that information's out there in that packet with us.
I can do the same.
Okay. All right.
I had a question, and I think he just answered it. I was going to say, first of all, thank you. I was blessed about 6 years ago to have sat through a session that Brian had in one of his coffees. And I felt as passionate as the last speaker did, and I decided I wanted to know how to get involved. So I would like to make sure that everyone else does too, because I took that from wanting to know, and you guys gave us the information, which I know you'll give to Brian, so I can make sure I do my job working to get it out as well. And I, as a volunteer, moved up the ladder to become the co-chair of Delaware's Human Trafficking Legislative Committee. And so I just would like to say now, since he already answered my question, that if there's anyone else that would love to get involved, I would love to have you join me, because it is something that we all can do. And I'm very thankful for everything that they do. They're always on all of our meetings, our Zooms. And so anyway, I don't want to take up anyone else's time, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon.
I'm Donna Lettieri. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting this on, Senator Pettyjohn. I followed you. I think I moved here in 2009. I met you when you gave a talk in Lincoln, I guess in 2011 or something like that, and I've been following you since. My question is, why is there so much pushback from the schools that won't let you in? We know, I know people from Sussex County that work with the immigrant children and the Spanish children, and that children don't re-register back in school. There are missing children. Like in Maui, there's missing children. There's many missing children in Delaware. What's being done to follow up on that? And what can we do to bring this education to schools? Why are you getting the pushback?
I'm not real sure how to answer that question. Because I don't know the motivation behind, I'm a little hesitant to maybe say pushback might be a little strong. I think it's not, for one thing, it's not mandated in education. Like there's not mandated training and mandated preventive education. And really since COVID, there's been so much put on education, on the Department of Education and teachers, that it's one more thing for them to have to do and keep up with and keep track of, and it's not mandated. And so I think it's really, really important to get into schools, and I just know that we've had a lot of difficulty getting into district schools. We've done some private schools, some charter schools, Christian schools, but I don't know the motivation behind us not being invited in to bring this, other than it's not mandated at this point.
That's why our public is going to have to do this, right? And you've got to do this. What about the children that aren't re-registering, that are missing? What are we doing to find out what's happening to them?
So the children that are still missing, I know we spoke a little bit about it earlier. So detectives throughout the state, we have specific people even within our unit that will handle the missing, actually any missing person, but any missing juvenile is definitely a huge concern. So what we do is we'll partner with the federal government to try to locate these children. And we use all types of different resources to locate them, because trafficking concerns, I think, boils down to juveniles that are runaways. That's always a huge concern. So when we have a runaway juvenile, we definitely jump on it right away. And you said something about resources for them, like once we find them. Okay. So
in the schools, but we can keep track of that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also have school resource officers too, and youth aid detectives that we work with. If they are registered within that school, we also work with them to make sure that we can find them. And once they get back to the school, we can provide them resources to keep them in school.
How successful has that been?
To be honest with you, I don't know how to answer that question. I work a little bit with the youth aid detectives. They come to us when it comes to missing juveniles. They typically will handle, if it's out of their school, will handle the missing juvenile case. But I don't have the answer to that. Sorry.
You may have answered a little bit of my question. When a child does go missing and they were recruited by sex traffickers, what is the process with the state police? Is it just a bolo that you put out, or is there a way you go searching for these children? My husband and I just got through with this with our granddaughter in Georgia. She was sex trafficked. And all those police departments did was put out a bolo to area police departments. We had to take it upon ourselves to find resources to find her.
I'm sorry.
So I have grandkids here in Delaware.
Yeah.
So that's a concern for me is what is it that you do once that's reported? Not all of them are runaways. Sometimes the runaways were coerced, but they're reported as runaways.
Yes. Obviously, going back to the runaways, that's a huge concern because a lot of the runaways that I have seen do have that high potential of being trafficked. So what we're doing is if we're dealing with any missing juvenile, it definitely takes the top of all of our cases because in the major crimes unit, we handle everything from sex abuse, child abuse, shootings, attempted murders. But if we have a missing juvenile, we put that on top of the list so we can try to figure out what's going on. And I'm not saying that every missing juvenile is going to be a trafficked individual. They could have something going on at home, and that's why they ran away. But the one step that we do take with a missing juvenile is we do put the bolo out, but we don't stop there. There's a lot more investigation that we do to make sure that we can find the juvenile in a timely manner. And we typically don't stop. We work on those cases every single day. And that actually goes for any type of missing person in general. Obviously, the missing juveniles take a little precedence, but any missing person, we're out there trying to find, and we work on that case every single day.
Okay, thank you.
And I could add just a little bit there. So when we have a case like, and we've had this happen where we'll have missing juveniles and we don't know where they are, we can ask the law enforcement agencies to flag them as a missing person. So then if any law enforcement agency comes into contact with them, then that designated officer would be contacted. And then we can also report it to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And we have a specific juvenile trafficking person that is our contact at NCMEC. And there's a specific person at NCMEC working on those trafficking cases, which is helpful.
Thanks.
Hi. Thank you for the great work that you guys are doing. And I think it's an amazing thing, this Hannah House. I'm the director of Delaware Simply Strong. I help a lot of domestic violence women, of course, a lot of mothers. And I come from New York, and I've been here for like 6-7 years. And I have experience with gang violence, and that comes across also with sex and human trafficking. But I found myself that I get a pushback in churches. Now, not all church, but a lot of the little Spanish congregations that they have. I was wondering if maybe is there, I'm not saying all of them, but I have gotten some. Is there investigations in some of these congregations? Because I know by word of mouth that there have been some issues where the pastors are aware that this is happening. So we can't play ignorant, close our eyes, and play deaf on it, because it's the reality of what we're facing.
and they do have a lot of unaccompanied minors. So when you say kids go missing, we also have to understand that there's also a boundary of how we tell people, yes, we found a child, because there's other reasons behind it. Sometimes people just think that kids have gone missing, and they're being protected, actually. But for the churches, is there any investigations based on why they do push back on organizations who try to help women with domestic violence? Because we also know that some of these women are also trafficked.
So I don't know if there's any, I don't know if we've actually looked into why there is that pushback. I know that in the last year I prosecuted a pastor for sexual solicitation of a minor, and that was a juvenile that was, in his congregation that he was soliciting, and he was convicted of that. So, I know that that's happening because I've seen it happen just in this past year, but I don't think we've actually looked into why there is that pushback, but that's definitely something that we can, kind of learn more about, because it's, we're learning along with everybody else. I know Yolanda's been doing this a lot longer, but I know Detective Yenser and I are, learning every training we go to, every training we attend, we learn more. So that's definitely something we can look into.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for showing up here tonight, and especially you bringing God into the picture. Thank you very much. The last human trafficking event I attended, Mr. Pettyjohn put on at the Georgetown Public Library, and I brought up the fact that most of the children are being human trafficked through CPS, Children Protection Services. And I said it was up around 70-some%. And the head of the State Police Task Force for human trafficking told me it was much higher than that. Have you made any headway with CPS and stopping them from trafficking children?
So to clarify, the question was whether we've investigated any CPS workers.
Have you made any headway with CPS stopping them from trafficking children? Are you watching the or looking for
Okay, one person at a time, please. I was having a hard time following along with your question. So, we don't have any active cases right now that I'm aware of where we are investigating any CPS workers. But anybody, what I hope we conveyed to you today is that anybody could be a trafficker. CPS workers, pastors, boyfriends, parents, anybody can be a trafficker. So, that's something that we're certainly aware of.
Thank you. The point I was making is that 70% of the children that are being trafficked in this country, CPS is doing it.
I've never heard that statistic, but I can definitely look into that. I don't know if either of you are aware of that. I've not heard that.
Hi. God bless you. And the both of you also. So I have just a question for clarification from the detective. Was one of the things that you said that there's two detectives per county that are specific to human trafficking? 2? That's 6 people in the state of Delaware. Is it because of the funding that, do you feel overwhelmed? Do the 6 people, if this is the corridor, if this is the welcome to Delaware, and we have 6, 2 per county, in the state of Delaware, how overwhelmed are they? How many more seats need to be filled? How many more eyes of the law can we get to help out in the hotbed on the eastern corridor, I-95? And I know I'm repeating myself. However, the sentence of 2 per county, how overwhelmed and how many more people are needed?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh. You mind if I answer?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. It's definitely because the trafficking detectives that are in the state, the 6 that I'm actually one of them, typically there was one coordinator and then an additional 6 detectives. But since I'm staying in the major crimes unit, I'm acting as a coordinator, and I'm still a trafficking detective, and I'm a major crimes detective. I can assure you, yes, there is a high volume of cases that we do handle. Eventually, and this is for every detective that does trafficking in the state of Delaware, it's part-time. That's kind of a bad word to use. We still have our main duty that we do throughout the day, but there's like an extra task that was added. So what we would like to do is make a full-time human trafficking unit like the Department of Justice has made, which would allow us to be able to work all day long on these trafficking cases and tackle all the different trafficking aspects, including massage parlors, prostitution stings, and all the trafficking survivors out there. But yes, so it would be very beneficial to eventually work, especially even if we have 6 detectives. If we had 6 detectives working full-time on human trafficking alone, we can get a lot of work done.
Well, it sounds like this is a priority, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very passionate about human trafficking. So yes, I would love to be full-time, and I think it should be a priority.
It should, yeah.
So.
Human trafficking.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been traveling cross-country on the interstates, and therefore I've been in a lot of rest centers. Many states have, at least in the women's room, I don't go to the men's room, on the back of all the stalls, they have a sign. Are you being trafficked? With a website and a number. And in one of those states, sorry, I don't remember which one, they said there is a sign. Are you aware of this? That if you are being trafficked, I don't remember, it has something to do with a hand. You do something with your hand and then go down.
Actually,
okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you. Because to whom do you do that if there's nobody else in the rest station?
There's a law that was passed in the General Assembly. It's pending signature by the governor right now for signage in those types of areas about the signs of human trafficking, what to do, QR codes to seek help, and those types of things. So that's legislation that was passed this past General Assembly. I think it cleared the House in June, and the governor's, it's waiting for the signature of the governor.
Sir, what exactly was that? The hand sign. The hand sign is like.
So,
okay.
I know that there are different, like, we go to a human trafficking training in Ocean City every year, and I've seen in their back rooms they have a sign, or there's a drink you should order from the bartender if you're being trafficked. I mean, I have seen those things. I don't know the sign off the top of my head. I know I've seen the sign that says the sign, but I don't remember the sign. So if somebody showed the sign to me, I would not know it. But this lady's flashing this. I don't know how widespread that is, but I do think the legislation that is awaiting signature by the governor will be very helpful because it's just increasing the awareness signs statewide. And we looked at what other states where they post signs and where we were lacking.
My question's for Zoe Ministries. I'm not a real good tech person. I don't have $600,000, but I would like to be able to contribute to your ministry if you need money. I assume you do.
Need money.
I assume you need money. And I was like, is there any place that you can mail a check to? I understand you got to keep the house separate, but you ought to have a P.O. box somewhere.
I absolutely do. Thank you for asking. Yes, we need lots and lots of money. Our P.O. box is really easy to remember. It's 26. P.O. Box 26 in Greenwood, 19950. You can also go on our website, and it gives you places where you can donate. We take PayPal, and there's all the information is on the website, which is up there. So, yes, please donate. We would love it.
We have 2 more here. 2 more questions.
She said she's short. I'm kind of like.
Hi, I have a quick question. So the definition of human trafficking included coercion, particularly with labor. If they are being coerced to doing things that are illegal, is there any type of waivers or protection from the law that
commit the crime?
if they commit the crime because they were coerced to commit the crime?
Actually, one of the cases I spoke about earlier, it was handled federally, but I was by their side for a majority of it. So the trafficking survivors that were involved in this ring, they were shoplifting from numerous locations. So when they were initially charged, because we didn't know what was going on. So when they are being coerced, or it's labor trafficking, and that's what the trafficker was charged with. There is ways that we can go back and take care of that, because obviously they're being coerced to commit the crime. But it's something that obviously we still have to prove. And I'm sure Caroline can probably explain that a little better.
So there is legislation that the Delaware Anti-Trafficking Action Council drafted last year. It's vacatur legislation. So basically, victims of human trafficking will be able to apply in one central location to get their records expunged if they were a victim of human trafficking. It's currently already in the Delaware Code, but it's going to clean that up a little bit. Okay. And we do plan to introduce that this year.
Hi, thank you for being here. Yolanda, I love you. And I'm a woman of faith, too. I'm an educator. I hope I have my job tomorrow. Please pray for me. I am writing my own Substack. Some of you are here and probably know me. My name is Wendy Elliott Mears. I'm an adult child sexual abuse survivor, and I'm writing my journey, and I'm a woman of faith. I will say trauma is a wound. I was sexually abused as a child, and my trauma didn't come forward until 2019 by a child in my own classroom. I had wonderful parents, and I was abused in a Delaware State licensed daycare. Long story short, I am also an educator with the Hispanic population. I tried my best tonight to get the Hispanic churches. I stopped by. My kids go there. The institutions, the organizations, 4.5 million children are sexually assaulted in them. I'm hoping one day we can have a forum where we truly address truth, veracity, the deeper evils, the things that are going on with Child Protective Services, the things that are going on with our politicians, the things that are going on with our AG judges and lawyers. I am a woman of faith. I started writing my journey last summer. The Lord brought me. I was literally laying outside in the sun. I said, God, please bring me someone to write my unfolding journey. I've had so much pushback and re-victimization. My own siblings were raped at this daycare and 3 decades of children and foster children. No one in the state of Delaware has cared to help me. I am healing. I've had my PTSD trauma. I've had my EMDR, my somatic expression. And now God has sent me a spiritual coach. She is a trauma-informed Christian coach. I'm going to a private conference in October. I can't announce where it is. I'm going to be with victims that have been satanic ritually abused, whose babies are being sacrificed, molested, raped. These are the deeper evils. This is the evil that has been on the planet since day one, and it is still here. I'm hoping at some point, like Texas, we get prayer back into our schools. Our babies are suffering, and I am tired. And I want to say something else. Our children, I go to a church, and I'm going to go to Guatemala at some point. Some of them are born without a name, and they find them in a dump. The family institution is the most hidden. And it doesn't matter what a mother or father does to their child. They still love their mother, and they still love their father, just like Jesus Christ loves each and every one of us. And I'm hoping some of our leaders, dry bones, get themselves together, because I want to tell you something. My children have been targeted when I went live with Yolanda and my testimony and what I'm trying to do in public policy. Me and my husband have had threats, death threats. I had to get a camera security system at my house, and I've had the worst year. And I can't say too much because I might not have a job tomorrow. I've had the worst year of my life, but the Lord sent me counsel, and I'm still winning, and I'm still walking through the fire. If you've not started reading my Substack, Wendy, Elliott, Mears, and Friends Substack, child porn is #1 in the United States. Do you hear my passion? This is what we want to hear from our leaders. I am tired of us turning the blind eye. The churches is an institution. Look at the Catholic Church right now. But it doesn't just happen in the Catholic Church. It happens in the Christian churches too. Do you know what this lady does for me? She holds my hand. People say, oh, forgive. Oh, have bitterness. You get rid of it. You can't get rid of it. You're poisoned as a child. You need someone to hold your hand so you can heal. I'm tired. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I can't handle too much more stress, Mr. Pettyjohn, and I know you know where I'm coming from. It's got to stop. The Lord has brought me an amazing journey, and I am going to keep walking through this fire, and I hope you understand me. Thank you. Question. I've tried to get power of predators in my school district. I keep getting denied. Can we make sure we can mandate this policy, that we mandate power over predators? It is normalized in our families. They need to know that it's wrong so they don't go back out there and seek the same type of abuse. It takes 3 generations for this sexual abuse to stop. 3. It's pure evil.
And that would be something that we would have to do legislatively. I think that was something that you had also said. You know, there is pushback from the schools and from the educators. In fact, we're looking to roll back some of the things that they're trying to teach in the classrooms right now to focus on some of the core curriculum that they have. But there are some things I think that are important for the children to know and to have awareness of. As they're growing up, as they're interacting with adults, and as they're being exposed to these things. So, yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I said those were the last questions. We are a little bit over time. I would like to thank Morgan Burnett back there that was running the slideshow and the sound tonight. Thank you so much, Morgan. And if you did sign up through the Eventbrite, we will be sending an email out with the link to the video of tonight's event with the slideshows as well. If you didn't sign up, if you just came in, make sure you left your email address there at the front desk, and we'll make sure to put you on there as well. Thank you all very much. Thank you to you 3 up there for being out here. And everybody, please have a safe drive home.